Amen. All right. So this is the part we call the Afterburn. By the way, for those of you that are getting the CDs by mail, we now started mailing out not only the teachings, but the Afterburn with them. So soon we should have Afterburns available on CD for people that want CDs, because we're starting to do that. So, because after all, there's so much that happens in the 30, 40-minute Afterburn that really helps to understand the teaching that we're now starting to put them together. So if you've been getting 6 teachings a month when we mail them out, now you're going to get 3, but you're also getting the 3 Afterburns with them. Okay, so you're getting still 6 CDs. So anyway, all right. If you are here and you want to ask a question or make a comment on the teaching that we just shared, Steve Waffle's got a mic. If you're online, we've got Curtin and Rob. Rob's here, who's going to do the microphone part of it. Okay, and again, we ask those of you online to please be respectful of the authority of the leaders online and don't make their job hard, because sometimes when they finish services, believe it or not, I get to hear what you guys are doing. I don't get to see it, but boy, sometimes these guys could really use a break because it's been rough. All right, so be nice online, respect their authority in the room, and appreciate that you have this. If you don't, then just go watch something else. I mean, you don't have to sit here and watch this. But if you're going to watch this, accept that it is what it is. It's a group service, okay, and we need to be respectful. All right, who wants to go first?
So I'd like to make an observation as I listened to all of this. When we started, one of the things that came to mind was that when enough people walk in the ditch, it starts to look like the road. So
that's not a bad concept. I like that. When enough people walk in the ditch, it starts to look like they're on a path. It looks like a road. Just if the ditch is big enough, you know, absolutely. All right, who's next? All right, Steve.
I want to say, one thing I don't understand is people think that because they've done this for a minute or so, they're ready to teach it. And I mean, I've been walking the Messianic for 8.5 years, and I still wouldn't even come close to even, maybe I could defend some positions, but that's only some. So how can somebody come in here in 1.5 years think they're ready to take a mic? That's craziness to me.
I mean, well, you know, look, it's the technology that makes it possible. Okay, without the technology, you wouldn't have this, because people would only be able to reach the people locally where they are, unless they could afford to get on television, right, back in the day, or radio. But now, with YouTube and internet, anybody could be available to just all you need is a computer or a phone with a camera on it, and every phone has those. You could just use your phone, and you could just go live from your phone right onto Facebook or YouTube without any problem. So the availability of the opportunity is part of the problem. Now, of course, we can leverage it for good, hopefully, but it's not easy. All right, Rob, what do you got?
Okay, from Kirsten Miller says, I think the body would greatly benefit from knowing in where and what ways the scriptures have been messed with, as you mentioned. Do you plan on doing a teaching on that?
At some point, we may cover that to some degree when I give my sort of journey testimony. We used to have a video on that. I need to make a new one. And in that, we will talk quite a little bit about the manhandling of the book. But I don't have a teaching on that per se. I do mention it every now and then on a teaching, but I don't have one for that. Just rest assured the truth is in your book. You may have to dig a little bit. You may have to pull, man's, greasy fingertips off of it as we, manhandle the book. But, you can dig. That's why we have things like look for 2 to 3 witnesses to establish something. Don't build your theology on something that appears in one place only. You need a Tanakh basis to really establish something instead of just only in the New Testament. You really got to look for it in the Tanakh. Of course, if you don't know the Tanakh well enough, you don't know that almost everything in the New Testament has a Tanakh basis. But, just build your theologies using the scriptural standards that establish the veracity of something. And, the more people that you see saying it, and I say people, having one writer say it in 4 places is not the same as having 4 different writers say it. Okay? Because people will quote me 4 different things that Paul says to argue that Paul said something. I said, but they're all Paul. show me somebody else saying it. I'm not against Paul. I could find almost everything that I use Paul for said by everybody else too. Just recognize that, quoting Galatians, Ephesians, and Colossians is still Paul. It's not 3 different writers. I want to see multiple writers and a Tanakh basis to really establish something. That helps with the filtering problems, the manhandling problems.
From Angelic Ewan says, Rabbi, what is our part? What is his part to get eyes to open, ears to hear, and is it in his time, or can we make it happen?
No, we don't have, look, go back to the do you know the Father and the Son teaching. You have to read, in the beginning of the first couple parts, he opens the eyes, he gives the ears, etc. Our job is to respond. Okay, is that clear? Our job is, you can't force your eyes open. You can't force anybody else's open. You can only see what he lets you see. That's why some of you have had this experience. You've heard me teach something a couple of years ago, and you didn't have those part of your eyes open, your ears open, or you just weren't ready for whatever reason. Then you go back and listen and go, oh, okay, I get it now. But because you couldn't force the issue, though. Some of it's not just that. Some of it's because you still have your own filters that you won't let go of and that are still screwing with your ability to see. I hate to put it that way, but you can't see straight because you got this stuff still that you're holding on to that you won't let go. All right? And so that's not him, that's your part. Your part is to let go of all that stuff and allow him to just show you. And if you're doing this right, when you're not fighting. Okay? When you fight against it, that's when you're doing your thing. You got to be much more yielding to him. Now, only be yielding to him when you know it's him talking and not some guy with a microphone or some woman with a microphone or whatever it is, but you're hearing him through them. And if it's him you're hearing, yield to it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, from Linda Vandenbroel says, what does the acceptable day of Yahweh mean?
Let's leave that to more of an eschatology thing. Okay, look, eventually we're leading to the day of Yahweh, which is the fearsome day of Yahweh. Okay, that's the end of times events, leading ultimately to when everything is under his authority in an acceptable way. But it's a lot more than that. We don't have time for that now. It's a good question, though.
Okay, from Olivier and Janet Hoffman, says, Rabbi, when he refers to the path of peace in Luke 1:79, is this linked to Matthew 5:9? Does this mean that we need to seek peace and pursue it to become children of Elohim?
Well, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, because they shall be called the sons of Elohim. So that's connected from that point of view in Matthew 5:9. But also it says that all his paths are peace. Okay? Our paths lead to conflict. Our paths lead to disputes and arguments and all those kind of things. His paths lead to peace.
Okay, from Chris Andy Ali Dennis says, question from Andy is Isaiah 29:18, Matthew 15:8-9. Rabbi, in our tradition of breaking bread, is it good for us not to share this with friends/family that follow Christianity, breaking bread with uncovenanted?
No, I mean, look, it's you should eat with whoever you want to. I mean, that was part of what happened with Peter and the whole sheet thing. It says, look, you can eat and break bread with people, okay? And this is one of the little problems at the beginning of Galatians, is their struggle to recognize that the Talmudic understanding that you can't eat with someone who's not covenanted or have a meal and those kind of things, is just not a scriptural thing. And so these are, walls that were torn down, so to speak. So no, I mean, you're not necessarily going to do the Kiddush and Motzi ritual. That was something that was done with Melchizedek and Abram and these kind of things. But you certainly could eat with your non-covenanted friends, family, etc. And if you're going to do Kiddush and Motzi, it's not going to hurt anything if they do it with you. It's not like a Torah commanded thing that only so-and-so can do it or whatever. So if they happen to be at your house on a Friday night and it's your tradition to do it, they certainly can do it too. Okay, it's not going to hurt anything.
From Gary Fugate, it says, Rabbi, Matthew 15, 1 through 3, Yeshua says they transgressed the commands of Elohim. In Mark 7, 6, 13, verse 8, forsaking the commands of Elohim, holding fast their traditions of men. It says, isn't Yeshua against the Talmud?
I answered that. Okay, I mean, look, this is where, again, you guys got to really fight against your emotional anti-Semitic stuff. He's not against the Talmud. He's against exactly what he says he's against. The traditions of men that either A, get in the way of keeping the commandments, or B, get elevated as if they are commandments of Yah. Otherwise, he never had a problem with the washing of hands ritual. Now, that's Talmud. That is 100% a Talmud instruction. Okay, it's not just because it's a tradition of men. I mean, it's actually literally in the Talmud. Okay? He never said there was a problem with that. He never said the tradition was wrong. He said, well, yeah, my guys are breaking that tradition, but you guys break commandments because of your traditions. So let's talk about that. Excuse me very much, whatever. I mean, he wants to say, okay, you want to get in my guys' faces for this nonsense. Well, let's deal with the real problem. You're breaking commandments. And so, does he have a problem with Talmud? No, not in general. He doesn't have a problem with a lot of people's cultural, just their own family's traditions in general. Every one of you has traditions in your family. You've got stuff that you learned as a kid, you grew up with, etc. These are family traditions. Some of those are perfectly appropriate and fine. Just depends on if they don't do those two things. Don't elevate it to being as if the creator of the universe commanded it to do, and don't let it interfere with anything that Yahweh says to do. Which includes if it's somehow connected to something pagan and inappropriate. And so, yeah, I'm sure there are sections of Talmud. Look, I've got a Babylonian Talmud on the wall of my office. There's 73 volumes. Okay, for those of you who think that you've read it. Okay? 73 books. This thick, okay? And much bigger. And I'm sure there's stuff in there that he doesn't agree with. But we have to be careful that we're not just sweeping and saying, Yeshua is against the Talmud. Because there are people out there in the Messianics that are coming from a very anti-Semitic background who are violently against anything that even hints of Talmud. But yet, they're all guilty of doing a lot of Talmud. If you are wearing tzitzit and tie your strings the way the Jews do, you're keeping Talmud. Ooh. Okay? There's a lot of things like that. But they are so anti-Semitic that they just want to find excuses to attack the Jewish community. So am I defending the Talmud? No, I'm just saying let's deal with issues individually. The Talmud is a vast resource of all of the historical Jewish understanding of trying to apply Torah. 73 multiple 100-page books. Okay? And so some of it's going to be messed up. Some of it's going to be perfectly neutral and not a problem. What's more important is how you approach it. And that's what he's talking about. Okay? But let's not just sweepingly, look, I don't think you learn nothing in your churches. I mean, they taught you some things that were correct in your churches. You learned that there was a Messiah in your churches. You learned that he died, was resurrected, that he's coming back. Those are all true. You learned that you're supposed to love each other. I mean, there's a lot of things you learned that were correct. Okay? So we don't just say that you learn nothing in those places. You learn some of you can quote an awful lot of stuff between Matthew and Revelation because you learned it in your churches. Now, you learned a lot of things that weren't correct too, so we're going to focus on those things, straighten those things out. If those things, if this was a room full of Jews, I promise you we would be addressing only that stuff mostly, the Talmudic stuff, the Jewish stuff that is messing up the congregation. But almost none of you in here are Jews. So none of that stuff is really a problem for you. What's a problem for you is the stuff you learn from the Christian side. So we got to straighten that stuff out, because that's the stuff that could trip you up. Most of you are not tripping over Talmudic things. You wouldn't know it if you did. Okay? And I'm serious. If we were in a place like in New York, if I had a congregation full of mostly Jewish backgrounded people, we would be addressing it in that way. It's just that's not the case. Most of the Messianic body is not Jewish or Israelite by birth, where they have that background. Most of them came through the church system. And so you have those problems and those challenges based on those filters. Now, when I do watch and talk to and listen to other people with Jewish backgrounds like myself, yes, I can see where they're being tripped up by some of their filterings because of the way they were raised. Now, remember, I wasn't raised very actively Jewish either. I was raised mostly with nothing. I went to Hebrew school, learned Hebrew and all that stuff, but I wasn't raised in an observant, focused, Torah keeping. So I didn't get a lot of the Talmudic stuff either, so good for that. I didn't get the Christian side, so good for that. So it gave me a sort of a more neutral place. Okay? But trust me, if we were, if I had a mostly Jewish audience, we would be having to unravel how they're filtering things through that Talmudic understanding or Kabbalistic understanding or whatever else they came from their background, that some of it will be fine, some of it won't. Just like when you were in the church, not all of it was wrong. The biggest problem was the church was that they convinced you that you were in the right place and you had no place to look for to go, that you were saved and that you were arrived. That was the lie that hurt you the most. That you had arrived and everything was great. There was nothing more for you to do. And now we have to teach you, well, no, there's stuff for you to do. And some of what they told you, that they told you, mostly it's not so much stuff they told you to do that was the problem. Yeah, they told you keep Sunday instead of Saturday and Christmas, Easter, but a lot of it was stuff you were told you didn't have to do that was a harder thing. You didn't have to keep the Sabbath, you didn't have to keep the feast, you didn't have to eat right, you didn't have to, there were things you didn't know. So you had to learn. A Jewish audience wouldn't have any of that problem. They'd have a different set of problems, okay? Doesn't make them better than you, it just means they'd have different problems. Does that make sense? Everybody get that now? Okay? And the manhandling has been done to both books. The early church fathers messed around with the New Testament, and then the Jewish Masoretes, etc., messed around with the Old, with all the same agenda. The Jews are trying to hide Messiah, and the early church fathers are trying to hide Messiah. But it was the Torah. They didn't know it was Messiah. But they wanted to hide Messiah in the form of the walking, talking, living Torah. The Jews wanted to hide Messiah in terms of the one that showed up in the flesh 2,000 years ago. So they wanted to hide things in some of the verses that point to exactly what Yeshua did. They won't read Isaiah 53 as part of their Torah portion, half Torah portions. Okay? They skip over that. So you understand what I'm saying? There was an agenda, both related to Messiah. And so you've got some really weird things in your New Testament, and you got some really weird things in your Old Testament. And for all you King James only people, sorry, your book's messed up. Okay? Get over it. Okay? You do not have a perfect book. The unadulterated word doesn't exist in written form today. All right? Oh, the original I'm sure was, no problem. But man's had a hold of it for a good long time. And every translation, he tweaked it more and tweaked it more and tweaked it more and messed it up. Okay? I mean, I prove this every time we have a conversation like that. I go, how many of you don't use the NIV? Why? The answer is because you think it's a bad translation. I can name other translations. How many of you don't use the this one or the that one because you think it's a bad translation? And that's all the King James are going, that's why we use the King James. Well, it's a bad translation too. I'm sorry for all you guys who will be offended. I actually had a bunch of them get up and leave one year on me in Knoxville. God, I get so tired. They were driving everybody dizzy in the congregation about that whole king, and I was using the scriptures, the same one, this exact same one that's in my hand. I was using this book, and I finally just showed them all the mistakes in their book, and they got up and left. Because it's just like Yeshua here, where they stumbled at the word. They could not receive the reality. I showed them Matthew, Mark, I don't think it was Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All three of those, where on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples are asking where to keep the Passover. Well, that doesn't work. If it's already the first day of unleavened bread, you already missed the Passover. So somebody in their book messed up the translation. They didn't understand the feasts. Those who were Greek and Roman were writing these things in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century as they made new copies of things and whatever. So much for your perfect book. Or either that or the disciples were the biggest dummies on the planet. They didn't know that the first day of unleavened bread comes after Passover, but I mean, come on. Okay, so they got up and they left. They weren't happy with me, which everybody then thanked me and applauded, and we had a good lunch after that. Not because we lost people, but because, if you're going to be that needing everybody to agree with you, you're better off out. Everybody will be blessed by your leaving, not blessed because you got them all to agree with you. Leave them alone. You want to be a blessing? Stop trying to push your agenda on everybody. All right? Yeah, you can clap for that. Okay? And I don't run into that often, but it could be the calendar, it could be the nature of the Godhead, it could be the shape of the earth, it could be anything. Okay, those are like the main ones that always come up. But stop pushing that on everybody. All you do is irritate everybody and you're stirring things up. Paul addresses this very clearly in Titus 3 when he says, do not spend your time arguing and debating over genealogies and scripture and Torah and all that stuff. It is unprofitable and useless. Knock it off. Find a teacher, let him teach, listen to what he says, move on. Okay? And stop being an authority on yourself and having to tickle everybody's, not tick, but poke everybody. Don't you know that you're wrong? You need to, if you're in sin and you're going right to hell if you don't keep this calendar. Oh, stop it. Okay? Go start your own congregation. Everybody has to listen to you. Okay? Let's see how empty your room stays. Well, that's your thing. Go do it. Start your congregation based on King James only, shape of the earth, Godhead, whatever, and make your own thing. There you go. And you and the 3 other people that show up can have fun. And it's not because only 3 people will agree with you. Only 3 people will probably only agree that should be so important that the whole agenda is that. The rest are going to want to hear more than just that. And so they're going to want to go someplace where that's not the only thing that's focused on. Okay? Hopefully you guys all know what I'm talking about. And I'm not picking on you if you have a strong belief on any of those things. Just don't drive everybody else crazy about it. Okay? You're entitled to have a strong belief about anything. Respect that not everybody's going to care as much as you do about whatever your thing is. Okay, next question.
From Andy Dennis says, Rabbi, would it be right to say that Matthew 15:13 is connected to Exodus, talking about the mixed multitudes came out, so not all were believing. Then later, Yeshua said, I never knew you.
Well, I mean, it's connected to all those things. It's also connected to lots of other places. Look, even like in the wheat and the tares, it says that at some point he will send the ones who are qualified to uproot the tares out. You're not supposed to do it. We're not qualified, etc. So yeah, these are all similar type of things. There are verses like Yeshua said, or whoever it was quoted, I'm trying to remember who it said, but it says where there are those that were, among us but not of us. Same idea. Okay? It's all saying the same thing. Wheat and tares is saying it. Sheep and goats is saying it. You see it play out when they came out of Egypt. You see it play out in all these different places. There were those who were following him, then he would say something, and then they wouldn't follow him anymore. You can either get uprooted or you can uproot yourself. Either way, there's a separation that's happening. Okay? Go ahead.
Okay, as a comment from Brian Bain, I think before the teaching. It says, Rabbi, your comments on depression and anxiety were spot on. It says, I was in major depression and anxiety for years in the military and after, and Abba, through Rabbi, pulled me out completely.
Oh, I appreciate that. What a blessing. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm glad that it was able to be of use to you. You know, it's very, very good.
Comment, Pamela Shufford says, what you were saying a little bit earlier, says, my old church told us if we are not finding God here, you're free to leave with our blessings. So I left, and 20 years later, I found MTOI.
Amen. I mean, and by the way, people leave here all the time. I mean, not all the time, but I mean, it happens on a regular enough basis. Some of them are uprooting themselves. Some of them are just seeking whatever, because whatever they're doing, just understand that most of the time in most congregations, okay, not just here, people choose to leave. They're not being thrown out of most places, okay? Now, some of you got thrown out of some churches because you started blah, 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 Torah, you know, all this, and then they got thrown out. But I say, but generally speaking, you see people uprooting themselves, or they're just deciding they need to go somewhere else. Just be really careful with this phrase, because this is dangerous in my opinion. Okay, if you choose to leave here or anywhere, it doesn't matter, be careful of claiming the Father is leading you in a different direction. But be careful that we're not claiming that something is him when it's probably us. And you don't know, maybe it was him. But, you know, a lot of people like to say, well, you know, I'm not coming here anymore and everything else because, well, the Father has me going now in a different direction. Well, that might be true, like when you left your church, the Father had you go in a different direction. But you don't have to go ahead and say that to everybody, because A, that number one may not be true, and B, even if it is true, that can be really harsh and offensive to the person hearing it, because now you're telling them basically that they're in the wrong direction. Okay? So there's no really need to say that. Just like I just feel like I need to be moving on. I'm on my journey, and this is where I feel like I need to go next. It's different than saying the Father personally has me going and doing all that. Now that could be true. I mean, because he's going to take and use and cause or allow everything that happens. So in its essence, there is some truth to that to some degree. I would just be more reluctant to use that phrase, because I've had a lot of people tell me the Father was this, that, and the other thing, and there was no fruit to bear any of that out over the years that I watched them later. Okay? So I would be careful with that. If you feel that you need to leave a place and go somewhere else, the Father will use that. But I would be careful of saying that it was him moving you. It may be. And you can feel that it's him. I just wouldn't be saying it. Okay? Does it make sense to everybody? Is that fair? Okay. Okay, next.
From Greg Wallen, it says, Rabbi, did the nullification of the commands process start with Hasatan, and how do we initiate the process of forgiving ourselves for all the nullifying that's taken place in our lives on our part?
All right. Yes to the first part. Yes, Hasatan starts that off with, did Yahweh really say? So yeah, right from the beginning, that's been the enemy's agenda, is to work with the part in you that would be willing to agree with the idea that Yahweh, didn't require you to do something. Did he really say? Okay. Do you really have to do that? Do you really have to do this? You have family members, by the way, that will try to see how far your Torah observance goes. Say, well, come on, can't you do this? I know it's Saturday, but wouldn't this be okay or that be okay? And so they try to see how much you're willing to expand the boundaries or break them or cross them that really Yah has put in place. So I agree with that. The other part of it, look, every one of us, Scripture tells us, has fallen short. Now, some of us have fallen short worse than others, and it doesn't matter. You're all here, so you're all equal. No matter how awful or less awful you've been up to this point, he called you because you can get there from where you are right now, and that's fine. So you need to release, remember, own it, fix it, let it go. All right, so you got to own it. Yep, did all those things, nullified his commands, ignored all these things, did all those things in my life. But the way that you do what you need to do is by demonstrating your heart to do now and not nullify, to embrace and not nullify. As far as the past stuff, let it go. Stop nullifying and move on. Do what he says to do. Don't do what he says not to do, okay? That's what you need to focus on, Greg, is stop worrying about what you didn't do and how you did and what you did and everything else. Look, you repent of it. You say, Father, I didn't know. I know now. I won't do it again. I'm sorry. Move on. Go. Focus all of your energy into now and moving forward, not into beating yourself up over the past. Okay?
From Pete and Brenda Lamb, says a comment, Rabbi Steve's comment about the unadulterated word brings to mind 1 Peter 2:2, where he talks about desiring the unadulterated milk of the word.
Right, and well, the unadulterated milk of the word, I think, has to do with desiring teachers that are going to teach it straight. And so there's a sense of that. But again, it's always hard. Every teacher, by default, has a certain bias, certain filters. I mean, the only pure teaching you're ever going to get is if Yeshua himself is here doing it. All the rest of us have, some level of something that can, hopefully minimally be affecting it. So the more that it's just reading the word and explaining the word and hopefully explaining it accurately, the more unadulterated it is. Okay? But there are no perfect teachers out there, so you can't, because every one of them has got their own life experience, their limited amount of knowledge. The only perfect teacher is sitting at the right hand. All right? And we'll wait for him to sit back on the throne down here and teach right. I'll be first in line when that yeshiva opens. Okay? Because a lot of you think, oh, you just like to be in charge. Listen, I'd be happy to sit down, put down the mic, and just learn. I am not married to this mic. I'd be very happy to have a teacher. All right, what's next?
Just one last comment here from Rick Berry. He says, praise Yah for leading us to Rabbi Steve and MTY, where we can learn how to walk out our deliverance. So we hear, well done, good and faithful servant, rather than depart from me, I never knew you.
Amen. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. Praise Yah that he's given me the opportunity to do this.